Well, hello, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I will be your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night we talked about there is good in the world, and there really is good in the world. And when you and I chat about all these terrible, awful, horrible things that are happening around us, we always forget about that. I certainly do. And yet I found tremendous good here in Europe after my initial encounter with my soulmate and her girlfriend, her lover, and their desperate need to rape the soul out of my body on a nightly basis. And actually, once I got past that, I found basically really lovely people here. And as we've chatted about before, the farther you get away from English-speaking countries, countries where English is the primary language, the United States, Great Britain, Ireland, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, it's astonishing how human people become the farther you are away from English-speaking countries. And again, it's one of these things I never thought about, never considered until it actually kept happening to me. And I've talked to a lot of other foreigners about this same phenomenon. In fact, several foreigners have actually brought it up to me that they discovered the farther they got away from Canada, the farther they got away from Ireland, and definitely the farther they got away from the United States, how much more sane, more rational, more human people were. So we need to remember that it's one of the I don't know if it's defense mechanisms, it's one of the excuses New Zealanders use when they invite foreigners, high-end professionals such as myself, are invited to New Zealand through this massive worldwide advertising campaign. And we get there and they abuse us. And, being a stranger in someone's home and they've invited you for 6 years to come and live with them, and you show up on their front doorstep one day and they say, "What the hell are you doing here?" You immediately assume you've done something wrong. And so for the first 3 months, 6 months in New Zealand being abused by New Zealanders, I blamed myself. I must be doing something wrong. And since I was making a concerted effort not to hang around other foreigners, as I desperately wanted to be a New Zealander, I didn't want to impose my previous upbringing or my culture on anybody else. I wanted to adapt to what I thought was my new country. And New Zealanders are very abusive people. For the last 40 years, the best and the brightest of the New Zealand people have fled the country for the same reasons I did. And when the best and the brightest of your people for a 40-year period have fled the country never to return, who does that leave behind? It leaves the morons. And morons, by definition, have a very limited capacity. And so it was a trick they learned to allow them to abuse us, high-end professionals. They blamed us as the reason they were abusing us. That's why you have to run. Don't walk, run. That's why I fled the United States for New Zealand. That's why I fled New Zealand for Europe. It's an excuse the moron uses to hurt you. Don't fall for it. In fact, it came to the point in New Zealand for 3 years. Whenever foreigners would meet each other, the first thing that we would say to each other is we wouldn't say, "Hi, how are ya?" We would say, "You did nothing wrong." That was our greeting. When you met a foreigner, whether you knew or not, the first thing you'd say to them is, "It's not your fault. You did nothing wrong." Not quite the place you want to live in. Not quite the place you want to make an effort to stay in. If the greeting between strangers is, "You did nothing wrong." Not, "Hi, how are you? How was your day? How the wife? How the kids?" The greeting is, "You did nothing wrong." Yeah, time to leave. So tonight I thought we would chat about timelines or memory implants. Since you and I are nothing except a collection of memories, of events, of things that we did or things that were done to us, you and I are just a collection of experiences, whether we're in a computer simulation, an educational learning program where you and I are hooked up to a machine, like in the Matrix. But you and I are students at university, and our parents have paid a lot of money for us to get a 4-year education in, say, North American studies, with English as a minor. And so for one Friday afternoon, we go to university. We're 19 years old. We lay down on a couch. We are strapped down so we don't hurt ourselves. And we're plugged into a computer, a virtual simulation of a world. And you and I are born into this new world. We live an entire lifetime in this new world, and we die in this new world, this simulated world, which to us could be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. But back at university, where we really are, it's only been a few hours. You and I are still only 19 years old. And yet we've completed a 4-year degree of a lifetime experience of living in North America and English as a minor. Or this is the real world, and it's not simply a universe, it's a multiverse. And you and I are living in the real world, and someone is experimenting on us from somewhere else, and I can't even imagine who or what or why. And yet you and I are living simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Western scientists have finally admitted that there are at least 9 other dimensions coexisting identical to ours right here and now, in exactly the same time and exactly the same space. Now, how's that possible? Well, you and I can chat with each other, hold each other, give each other a big hug and a kiss, share a cup of coffee, talk to each other, because the atoms in our body vibrate at the same frequency, as do the atoms in the floor we're standing on, the atoms in the lamp you're trying to turn on, the computer you're typing on. All of the atoms in this dimension vibrate at the same frequency, so you and I can interact with one another. Again, it gets back to being in your car and you've got the radio on, and your favorite radio station is 100.1 on the FM radio dial. And it's country western. You like country western, but sometimes you like rock. So you adjust the frequency on your car radio to 100.2 on the FM radio dial. So you're no longer listening to country, you're now listening to rock. Why? Because the silicon chip is now set to receive vibrations at a different frequency, which means that the country western station, which is broadcasting at 100.1 megahertz frequency, is now set for 100.2 megahertz, which is the radio frequency that the rock station is broadcasting on. So today you're listening to country music, tomorrow you're listening to rock. And by the same line of reasoning, multiple dimensions can exist in the same time, in the same space, because they all vibrate at a different frequency. You and I can talk because we vibrate at the same frequency. But if you or I, if our frequencies for whatever reason alter ever so slightly, all of a sudden you and I can't talk because we're vibrating at a different frequency. I'm broadcasting from a radio station at 100.1, but you're set at 100.2. So we don't even know we exist to each other. And perhaps that's what's happening to me. Perhaps the frequency of my atoms changes and I see the world change around me. And I notice the most astonishing changes in the world around me, but nobody else does. Probably because nothing in that world, that dimension, in that frequency has changed, but I have. So that's the second possibility. The third possibility is that we are in a holographic projection, which we'll talk about some other time because frankly it's very scary stuff. And of the 3 possible realities that you and I are living in, the holographic universe frightens me quite a lot. And so we'll have to talk about that at another time. There are other possibilities as to why our reality changes and why timelines might shift? Well, it turns out that whenever you detonate a nuclear bomb, you can actually blow holes in time. And Western scientists are now finally speculating that there are bubbles of time all around this planet which have been created by nuclear explosions. In fact, this goes back to, I think, the 40s. And publicly, you and I are finally beginning to hear about it, that these bubbles of time have been created by massive explosions, nuclear explosions. What is a nuclear explosion, by the way? Well, again, it gets back to atoms. The reality is you and I are mostly just empty space. The world around us is mostly just empty space. What makes us able to interact, again, with each other and with the world around us, the floor, the ceiling, the door, is that we all vibrate at the same frequency. Our atoms in our body vibrate at the same frequency. But just like our solar system, which is in itself an atom, there's planets and there's a star. There's a neutron, a proton, and an electron. And they're orbiting each other. Well, the electron and the proton orbit the neutron. In the case of, if you really want to know what an atom looks like, again, look at our solar system. Our sun is a neutron, it has a neutral charge. And the planets spinning around it have positive and negative charges. Why? Because the universe is electrical. You and I are basically empty space because we're made up of lots of little solar systems, which we think of as atoms. They're bound together by an electrical charge, magnetic charge. So when you try to walk through a wall, well, you're not actually going to make it through the wall, unless you're going pretty fast. Because the electrical charge, the magnetic charge of the atoms in that wall are a lot tougher than the atoms in your body. So there's going to be a collision, but mostly it's a collision of electricity and magnetism, which we think of as being physical. A nuclear explosion, turns out, actually knocks the protons and the electrons out of their orbit around their primary, around their sun, if you were. Can you imagine the devastation if, say, Jupiter was knocked out of its orbit? What it would do to the rest of the solar system? We'd be ripped to pieces because of the magnetic charge of Jupiter. Everything would destabilize. It's the same effect that the dead brown dwarf star that's come into the neighborhood with its own 3 planets. And every 32,000 years, it passes between the Earth and the Sun. Causes some problems for us. It's that electrical charge, that magnetic field, passing through the plane of our solar system. It's going to cause havoc, as it's doing now. But that's what a nuclear blast is. It's ripping the protons and the electrons away from the neutron at the atomic level. That's a tremendous release of energy, especially when the effect cascades to the other atoms around it. But apparently it also rips holes in time. So it gets down to timelines or memory implants because, frankly, and the fact that I'm probably just insane doesn't help, but at least I don't want to hurt anybody, so I'm relatively harmless. I have very clear memories of events with very clearly specific people that never happened. And I wonder sometimes, is it these timelines shifting around us, these bubbles of time that have been caused by nuclear explosions going back to the 40s? Or, a creepy thought, of course, is always the CIA, NSA, the Rockefeller family simply playing with our memories, simply implanting memories in us that never happened, that are triggered when a certain series of events occurs. This is black magic, satanic ritual. It's hatred, is what it is. How bad can bad get? Why anybody would do that, I have no idea. Hatred has a limitless ability. Hatred exists for hatred alone. but it needs to feed. I once, this old actor friend of mine, very nice fella, he'd been in Hollywood since I think 30s or 40s. He was a professional dancer, he was a professional stuntman, he was a professional extra. That's all he ever wanted to be. I think it was Adolf Cukor, a very, very famous German director way back when, wanted to make him a star, and he actually turned the guy down. He didn't want to be a star. He wanted to be what he was, a professional extra, a professional dancer, a professional stuntman. A very nice man. I could never visit his home without leaving without bags of food. He's one of these, I'm sure he's gone by now, but he was a lovely man. And I was talking to him about some of his friends who, they were all ex-Army Air Corps, and I was telling him the truth about his friends, and he, of course, didn't want to believe me, and so we never spoke again, because he found out much later, actually not that much later, that I told him the truth about what his friends were going to do to him, and he was so embarrassed that he couldn't face me again. What I had told this old actor fellow, I said, I told him what, I tried to tell him what they were doing to me, and he didn't want to hear. And I finally said to him, you know what I'm going to do, Lee? I'm going to leave them alone. I'm going to leave them alone with each other. And this old actor, this nice old guy, he just turned white. And he said to me, that's the most horrible thing I've ever heard. And I said, yeah. So it's really not necessary for violence of any kind. All we have to do is leave them alone. Just leave them alone with each other. That's the most horrible thing you can do to our masters. Just leave them alone. If you don't have the nerve or the guts or the ability to say no to them, just as a man, as a woman, remember you're a human being, turn your back and walk away from them. And leave them alone. Leave them alone with each other. They've done a lot of damage to our world. They've done a lot of damage to us. So whether it's timelines or memory implants, I think we can pretty safely say they're behind it, no matter which way you go. We've got a lot of repairing to this world to do. We've got a lot of repairing to ourselves and to each other to do. And it always gets back down to you. It's your choice. You have to decide. Me? I don't know. Because I have very clear memories of wonderful things that here, they never happened. And yet I can remember as clearly as I'm sitting here now. I can remember the sight, the smell, the taste, the look, the feel, the people. And I ran into two people in New Zealand who I have very clear memories of, very clear, of years and years of relationships together. And they didn't know me. And that tore me to pieces. I spent most of my time in New Zealand in one form of shock or another. It was quite a learning experience. But I met these two people, and I knew them, and they didn't know me. I remember pretty much a lifetime with them, and they had no idea who I was at all. So again, the question is timelines, bubbles of time, different timelines created by the nuclear holocaust we've done to ourselves and still don't even realize the extent of the damage? Or is it memory implants? Just ugly, nasty, black magic ritual nonsense that was implanted in me years and years ago, and a certain series of events triggered them. I don't know. I really don't know. But these are the kind of questions I keep having to answer. And honestly, I don't have any answers. I just have more questions. But for yourself, you have to decide. An ancient blessing, an ancient wish, an ancient dream of a people who are long gone, and I wish they were here. May you live as long as you wish. May you love as long as you live. For the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel fighting his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race. Their black magic captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.